Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
The antique pearl necklace arrived at my cramped Brooklyn workshop on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in tissue paper so old it crumbled at my touch. Mrs. Chun, my elderly client, had inherited it from her grandmother and wanted it restored before passing it down to her own granddaughter. At first glance, it looked like a dozen other vintage pieces I'd worked on, cream-colored pearls strung on fraying silk, the clasp tarnished with age. But when I held it up to the light, something extraordinary caught my eye. These weren't ordinary pearls. Beneath their lustrous surface was an undertone I'd never seen before, a subtle golden warmth that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. My hands trembled as I examined each pearl under my magnifying glass. The nacre was thick, incredibly smooth, and had a depth that spoke of years spent in pristine waters. I'd been restoring jewelry for 8 years, ever since I graduated from the Gemological Institute with more debt than prospects. My tiny workshop barely paid the rent, and I lived on ramen noodles and coffee more often than I cared to admit. But these pearls, these were something special. Something that could make my career if I could trace their origin and tell their story. The problem was research. Real research required travel, and travel required money I didn't have. I'd been putting off a trip to the Maine coast for months, where similar pearls had reportedly been cultivated by a family-run operation. The plane tickets, hotel costs, and rental car fees had kept me grounded in Brooklyn, making do with online research and library books. But looking at these pearls, I knew I had no choice. Mrs. Chun was paying me well for this restoration, but not well enough to cover proper accommodations. I'd have to get creative. That's when I found the Cultural Preservation Program. Buried in a Maine tourism website was a small notice about volunteer opportunities with local artisans. Room and board provided in exchange for documenting traditional crafts. It seemed too good to be true that desperation makes optimists of us all. I filled out the application that same day, attaching photos of my previous work and a heartfelt essay about preserving traditional jewelry-making techniques. 3 days later, I got a response from someone named E. Thomas, accepting my application and providing an address in Lighthouse Point, Maine. The message was brief, almost businesslike, but it ended with a line that made my heart skip. Bring warm clothes and an open mind. The ocean here has stories to tell. 2 weeks later, I was driving a rented compact car up the winding coastal highway toward Lighthouse Point, my precious necklace secured in a padded case beside me. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly to my right, its surface choppy with whitecaps. I'd imagined Lighthouse Point would be a quaint fishing village with tourist shops and bed and breakfasts. Instead, I found myself on a narrow gravel road that seemed to lead nowhere, past weathered houses that grew more sparse with each mile. Just when I was beginning to think I'd made a terrible mistake, the lighthouse appeared. It stood on a rocky promontory, its white towers stark against the gray October sky. But it wasn't the lighthouse that took my breath away. It was the woman standing beside it. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with dark hair whipping in the ocean breeze. She wore work clothes, jeans, rubber boots, a thick sweater that had seen better days, but she moved with a natural grace that made even the practical outfit look elegant. As I parked and got out of my car, she turned toward me, and I got my first look at the most striking eyes I'd ever seen. They were the color of sea glass, that perfect blue-green that only comes from years of ocean tumbling. "You must be Savannah," she said, her voice carrying a hint of Maine accent that made my name sound like poetry. "I'm Erica Thomas. Welcome to my little corner of the world." Her handshake was firm, her palms slightly rough from manual labor. Up close, I could see that she was probably in her early 30s, like me, with laugh lines around her eyes and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose that spoke of years spent in the sun. "Thank you for accepting my application," I said, suddenly aware of how formal I sounded. "I have to admit, this isn't quite what I expected." She laughed, and the sound was like waves on shingle. "Most people expect lobster traps in tourist shops. Instead, you get me and my pearl farm." "Hope you're not too disappointed. Pearl farm?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "You're a pearl farmer?" "Third generation," she said with evident pride. "My grandmother started it, my mother expanded it, and now I'm trying to keep the tradition alive in a world that mostly buys cultured pearls from Asia." She gestured toward the lighthouse. Come on, I'll show you where you'll be staying. Fair warning, it's not exactly the Ritz. The lighthouse had been converted into living quarters, with the lower levels serving as a workshop and office, and the upper floors transformed into surprisingly cozy living space. My room was in the curve of the tower, with windows that looked out over the ocean in 3 directions. It was small but charming, with a brass bed, a writing desk, and shelves, lined with books about marine biology and coastal history. This is incredible, I breathed, watching the late afternoon sun paint the water in shades of gold and amber. Wait until you see the sunrise, Erica said from the doorway. It's different every day, but it's always spectacular. She showed me the rest of the lighthouse, the kitchen with its vintage stove and ocean view, the living room with its stone fireplace and comfortable furniture, the workshop below with its tanks and equipment for processing pearls. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but clearly practical rather than decorative. So, she said as we stood in the workshop, surrounded by the gentle hum of water filtration systems, tell me about this project of yours, your application. Mention documenting traditional techniques. I pulled out the antique necklace, still in its protective case. I'm restoring this for a client, but I think these pearls might have an interesting story. They have an unusual golden undertone that I've never seen before. Erica took the case from me, her fingers brushing mine in the transfer. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, and I had to focus on her face to steady myself. She was examining the pearls with the intense concentration of an expert, her brow furrowed in thought. Oh my God, she whispered after a long moment. These are grandfather's pearls. What? She looked up at me, her sea glass eyes wide with amazement. These are from my great-grandfather's farm. See this golden undertone? It comes from a specific type of algae that used to grow in these waters. The environmental changes of the 1960s killed most of it off. She held one of the pearls up to the light. I haven't seen pearls like this in 20 years. My hands were shaking as I processed what she was telling me. So this necklace was made from pearls cultivated right here, probably sometime in the 1940s or 1950s. She set the case down carefully. Savannah, do you have any idea how rare these are? There might be a dozen necklaces like this in the entire world. I felt like I was dreaming. Not only had I found the origin of the mysterious pearls, but I'd stumbled into the very place where they'd been created, met the descendant of their creator. It was the kind of coincidence that only happened in novels. Would you ... I started, then stopped, suddenly shy. Would you be willing to help me document their story for the restoration project? Erica smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out from behind clouds. Savannah, I've been waiting my whole life for someone to ask me that question. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. I'd wake before dawn to the sound of waves against rocks, make coffee in the lighthouse kitchen, and join Erica for her morning inspection of the pearl beds. She worked in the water regardless of weather, checking the health of her oysters, monitoring water quality, adjusting the floating platforms where the mollusks grew. Watching her work was like watching a dancer. She moved through the chest-deep water with easy confidence, her wetsuit sleek as a seal's skin, diving down to check the suspension lines with breath-holding ability that amazed me. When she surfaced, pushing wet hair back from her face, she looked like some mythical sea creature risen from the depths. The water's perfect today, she said on my 3rd morning, treading water beside her boat. Want to try diving with me? I'd brought a wetsuit at her suggestion, but the thought of going underwater in the frigid Atlantic terrified me. Still, I'd come here to document traditional techniques, and pearl diving was as traditional as it got. I should warn you, I said as I struggled into the neoprene suit. I'm not much of a swimmer. You don't need to be, Erica assured me. The suit will keep you buoyant, and I'll be right beside you. Just breathe normally and let the ocean hold you. The first shock of cold water drove all thoughts from my mind. But as my body adjusted to the temperature, I began to understand what Erica meant about the ocean holding me. The salt water supported my weight, the gentle current rocked me like a cradle, and below us, the pearl bed spread out like an underwater garden. Erica dove first, her powerful kicks carrying her down 20 feet to where the oyster lines hung in neat rows. I followed more cautiously, equalizing the pressure in my ears as I descended. The underwater world was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of murky darkness, I found crystal clear water filtered by the shallow depth and rocky bottom. Kelp swayed in the current like dancing ribbons, and small fish darted between the oyster lines and silver flashes. But it was the oysters themselves that took my breath away. Dozens of them hung from each line, their shells encrusted with marine growth, patiently transforming irritants into treasures. Erica gestured to one particular large specimen, then carefully lifted it from its position and brought it to the surface. "This one's ready," she said when we both surfaced, breathing hard from the dive. "Want to see a pearl being born?" Back in the workshop, she showed me the delicate process of opening the oyster and extracting its treasure. Her hands were steady and sure as she worked the shucking knife, finding the precise point where the shell would open without damaging the pearl inside. "It's all about patience," she explained as she worked. "Rushing will destroy years of growth in seconds." When the shell finally opened, revealing a perfect pearl nestled in the oyster's flesh, I gasped aloud. It was smaller than the antique pearls in my necklace, but it had that same golden undertone, that same inner fire. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "They all are," Erica said simply. "Every single one is a miracle." Over the following days, she taught me everything about pearl farming, the careful selection of oyster stock, the precise placement of irritants to encourage pearl growth, the years of tending and waiting that went into each harvest. I documented it all, taking photos, making notes, recording her explanations of techniques passed down through generations. But I was documenting more than just pearl farming. I was cataloging the way Erica's face lit up when she talked about her work, the careful reverence with which she handled each oyster, the pride in her voice when she spoke of her family's legacy. I was falling in love with her passion, her knowledge, her absolute commitment to preserving something beautiful in a world that increasingly valued speed over quality. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was falling in love with her. It happened on a Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after my arrival. We'd spent the day processing a harvest, carefully extracting pearls from mature oysters and grading them according to size, shape, and luster. My hands were pruned from the salt water, my back ached from bending over the sorting trays, but I'd never felt more satisfied with a day's work. "You're a natural at this," Erica said as we cleaned up the workshop. "Most people can't tell the difference between AA pearl and a commercial grade, but you spotted flaws I almost missed." "I've been working with gemstones for years," I replied, but her praise made me glow with pride. "It's just a matter of knowing what to look for." "It's more than that," she insisted. "You have an eye for beauty, for quality. That's not something you can teach." We were standing close together at the sorting table, her hip brushing mine as she reached for a tray. The contact was casual, innocent, but it sent heat racing through my veins. I'd been aware of my attraction to her for days, fighting it, telling myself it was just admiration for her expertise. But now, with her so close, I could smell her shampoo and see the golden flecks in her sea glass eyes. I couldn't deny it anymore. "Savannah," she said softly, and something in her voice made me look up. Her expression was serious, almost vulnerable. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Are you seeing anyone back in Brooklyn?" The question hung in, the air between us, loaded with possibility. I should have lied, should have invented a boyfriend to put distance between us. Instead, I found myself shaking my head. "No," I whispered. "There's no one." Her smile was radiant. "Good," she said, and then she was kissing me. It was soft at first, tentative, giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't want to pull away. I wanted to sink into her warmth, to taste the salt on her lips, to lose myself in the feeling of her hands tangling in my hair. I'd kissed women before, but never like this. Never with this sense of coming home. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment you got out of your car," she admitted. "Why didn't you?" I asked, my voice husky with desire. "Because you're here to work, and I didn't want to complicate things." "But Savannah," she cupped my face in her hands, thumbs stroking across my cheekbones. "I think it's too late for that." She was right. Everything was already complicated, already changed. I was supposed to be here for 2 weeks, documenting traditional techniques and restoring an antique necklace. I wasn't supposed to be falling for the woman who was teaching me. Wasn't supposed to be imagining what it would be like to stay in this lighthouse forever. "Erica," I started, but she silenced me with another kiss, deeper this time, more demanding. "Don't overthink it," she murmured against my lips. "Not tonight. Tonight, just be here with me." She led me up the spiral stairs to her room at the top of a lighthouse, her hand warm and sure in mine. The space was simple but beautiful, with white walls, dark wood furniture, and windows on all sides that framed the ocean like living paintings. Moonlight streamed through the glass, painting silver paths across the water and casting everything in ethereal light. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, turning to face me beside her bed. In answer, I reached for the hem of her sweater, pulling it over her head in one smooth motion. Her skin was pale in the moonlight, marked here and there with small scars from years of working in the ocean. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with strength, with the grace that comes from living authentically. What followed was a night of discovery as profound as anything I'd learned about pearl farming. Erica made love like she worked, with patience, with reverence, with complete attention to every detail. She mapped my body with her hands and mouth, finding places I hadn't known were sensitive, drawing sounds from me I'd never made before. I responded with equal passion, exploring the contours of her shoulders, the sensitive skin of her neck, the way she arched beneath my touch. We moved together with an urgency that spoke of long-suppressed desire, but also with a tenderness that made my chest ache with emotion. Later, as we lay tangled in her sheets, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below, she traced lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. "What happens now?" I asked, echoing the question that had been haunting me all week. "Now we see what develops," she said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head, like pearls, layer by layer until something beautiful emerges. I should have known it couldn't last. Paradise never does, especially when you're not meant to stay there permanently. The reality check came in the form of a phone call from Brooklyn on my 10th day in Maine. "Savannah, thank God you're answering," came Mrs. Chun's anxious voice through my phone. "I need the necklace back immediately. There's been a family emergency and my granddaughter's wedding has been moved up. Can you have it finished by Friday?" Friday? 3 days away. The necklace was barely half restored and I'd been so caught up in documenting the pearl farm's history and falling for its owner that I'd let my primary obligation slide. "Mrs. Chun, I understand the urgency, but the restoration requires—" "I don't care what it requires," she interrupted, her usual politeness replaced by desperation. "I'll pay double your fee, triple if necessary, but I need that necklace for my granddaughter's wedding. It's all I have left of my grandmother." The raw emotion in her voice made my stomach clench with guilt. This wasn't just about money or deadlines. This was about family, about traditions passed down through generations. The same things Erica valued so deeply in her own work. "I'll make it happen," I promised, though I had no idea how. After I hung up, I sat staring at the antique necklace, calculating what it would take to finish the restoration in 3 days. I'd need to work around the clock, barely sleeping, giving up any time with Erica, but more than that, I'd need supplies I didn't have, specific tools, replacement silk thread, cleaning compounds that I planned to order when I got back to Brooklyn. Erica found me in the workshop an hour later, hunched over my supplies case with a look of panic on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, reading my expression. I explained the situation, watching her face fall as she realized what it meant. "So you have to leave," she said quietly. "I have to go back to Brooklyn tonight, work nonstop for 3 days, then deliver the finished piece." I couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Erica. I know this isn't what we planned." "No," she said firmly. "You don't have to leave. We can figure this out." "How?" "I need tools I don't have, supplies that aren't available here. Then we'll get them." She was already moving toward her computer. "There's a jewelry supply house in Portland. They do rush orders. We can drive down tonight, pick up whatever you need, and you can finish the work here." "Erica, that's a 4-hour round trip. And the supplies alone will cost." "I don't care what it costs." She turned to face me, her sea glass eyes fierce with determination. "You came here to document traditional techniques, remember? Well, this is traditional too. Craftspeople helping each other, preserving something precious. Let me help you." The kindness in her offer brought tears to my eyes. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering." She crossed to where I sat and took my hands in hers. "Savannah, we've got something special here. Don't let a deadline destroy it before we've even figured out what it is." That night, we drove to Portland through a storm that seemed to come from nowhere. Rain lashed the windshield, wind buffeted the car, and lightning split the sky in jagged forks that illuminated the churning ocean. But inside the car, surrounded by the steady rhythm of wipers and the warm glow of the dashboard, I felt safer than I had in years. "Tell me about your first pearl," I said as Erica navigated the winding. "Coastal Road." She smiled, her face briefly illuminated by an oncoming car's headlights. "I was 8 years old, helping my grandmother with the harvest." She let me open an oyster, and inside was this tiny, imperfect pearl, more gray than white, shaped like a teardrop. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Do you still have it?" "Right here," she said, touching a small pendant at her throat that I'd noticed but never asked about. "I wear it every day to remind me that beauty doesn't have to be perfect to be precious." The jewelry supply house was closed when we arrived, but Erica had called ahead, and the owner, a friend of her mother's, met us at the back door. With a box of everything I'd requested, he refused payment, waving away my credit card with a gruff, "Pay it forward, kid." We drove back through the storm in comfortable silence, my relief at having the supplies mixed with amazement at how easily Erica had solved my crisis. She navigated problems the way she navigated rough seas, with calm competence and absolute determination. The next 3 days were a blur of focus work and stolen moments. I worked on the necklace from dawn until well past midnight, my hands steady despite my exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that I was restoring not just a piece of jewelry, but a family's legacy. Erica brought me meals I barely tasted, coffee that kept me going when my eyes burned from close work, and her quiet presence in the workshop that somehow made the tedious process feel less solitary. She didn't hover or interrupt, but I was aware of her moving around the space, tending to her own work while staying close enough to help if I needed anything. The restoration was more complex than I'd initially realized. The silk thread was so old it crumbled at my touch, requiring me to restring each pearl individually. Several of the pearls had developed hairline cracks that needed stabilizing with specialized adhesive. The clasp was corroded beyond repair and had to be completely rebuilt using traditional techniques that took hours to execute properly. But as I worked, the necklace began to reveal its true beauty. The golden undertone in the pearls became more pronounced as I cleaned away decades of accumulated oils and dirt. The luster deepened until each pearl seemed to glow with inner light. By the final night, I was working on a piece that was even more beautiful than Mrs. Chun had remembered. "It's incredible," Erica breathed, looking over my shoulder as I made the final adjustments to the clasp. "It looks exactly like the pieces my great-grandfather used to make." "That's because it probably is one of his pieces," I replied, setting down my tools with hands that shook from exhaustion and relief. "Look at the clasp construction, the way the pearls are graduated. This is master-level work." She picked up the finished necklace, letting it pool in her palms like liquid moonlight. "My great-grandfather would have been so proud to know that. One of his pieces survived, that it's going to be worn by another bride in another generation." The emotion in her voice brought tears to my eyes. We weren't just restoring jewelry. We were preserving history, honoring traditions, connecting past and future through the careful work of our hands. "I couldn't have done this without you," I said softly. "Yes, you could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to." She set the necklace carefully in its case and turned to face me. "Savannah, I know you have to leave tomorrow, but I don't want to go," I interrupted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I know that's crazy. I know we've only known each other for 2 weeks, but I don't want this to end." Her smile was radiant. "Then don't let it end." "But how?" "My life is in Brooklyn, my business can be anywhere," she finished. "Jewelry, restoration, documentation of traditional crafts. You could do that work from here just as easily as from New York, probably better, with access to authentic techniques and master craftspeople." The possibility she was suggesting was both thrilling and terrifying. Could I really uproot my entire life for a woman I'd known for 2 weeks? But then I looked around the Lighthouse workshop, at the pearl beds visible through the windows, at Erica's face glowing with possibility, and I realized I wasn't being asked to abandon my life. I was being offered the chance to build a better one. "What about your work here?" I asked. "The pearl farm? Could use someone with your skills." "Think about it. Restoration and documentation, traditional techniques preserved for future generations. Maybe even custom jewelry using our pearls." Her eyes were bright with excitement. "We could build something incredible together, Savannah. A business that honors the past while creating something new." I delivered the restored necklace to Mrs. Chun on Friday afternoon, watching through tears as she fastened it around her granddaughter's neck for a final fitting. The young woman glowed with happiness, and the pearls seemed to respond to her joy, their golden undertone warm against her skin. "It's perfect," Mrs. Chun whispered, pressing a check into my hands that was significantly more than we'd agreed upon. "Thank you for understanding how important this was." But as I walked back to my empty Brooklyn apartment, the silence felt deafening after 2 weeks of ocean sounds and Erica's presence. Everything looked smaller, shabbier, less significant than I remembered. My workshop felt cramped after the spacious lighthouse, my bed narrow and cold after sharing Erica's warm embrace. She called that evening, her voice warm and slightly static. Through the phone connection, "How did the delivery go?" "Perfectly." Mrs. Chun was thrilled, and the bride looked like a princess. I curled up on my couch, closing my eyes and trying to pretend she was there with me. "How are the pearl beds?" "Lonely without you checking on them every morning," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Savannah, have you thought any more about what we discussed?" I had thought about little else during the 6-hour drive back to Brooklyn. The practical obstacles seemed insurmountable, breaking my lease, closing my business, moving across the country to be with someone I'd known for 2 weeks. It was the kind of impulsive decision that led to heartbreak and financial ruin. But it was also the kind of decision that led to happiness. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Of what?" "Of making a mistake. Of uprooting my life for something that might not work out. Of losing myself in someone else's dream." Erica was quiet for a long moment. "What if I told you I'm scared too? Scared of asking you to give up everything for me. Scared of not being enough to make you happy. Scared of losing the most incredible woman I've ever met because I'm too afraid to fight for what we have." Her honesty broke through my defenses, like waves against stone. "Erica, come back," she said simply. "Not forever, not with any promises or obligations. Just come back for a month, see how it feels to live here, to work here. See if this thing between us is as real as it felt in the lighthouse. A month." It was long enough to sublet my apartment, short enough to change my mind if things went wrong, long enough to see if what we'd found was real love or just the magic of an isolated place and perfect timing. "Okay," I said before I could lose my nerve. "I'll come back." I returned to Maine 3 weeks later with 2 suitcases, my essential tools, and a heart full of hope and terror. Erica met me at the Portland airport, and the moment I saw her face light up when she spotted me in the crowd, I knew I'd made the right choice. "You came back," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. "I told you I would." "I know, but I was afraid you'd change your mind. Brooklyn has a lot more to offer than a lighthouse and a crazy pearl farmer." "Brooklyn doesn't have you," I said, and kissed her right there in the middle of the airport, not caring who saw. The month I'd promised turned into 3, then 6. I sublet my Brooklyn apartment indefinitely, transferred my business registration to Maine, and slowly, carefully, built a new life around the rhythm of the tides and the needs of the pearl beds. It wasn't easy. There were days when I missed the energy of the city, the convenience of having everything I needed within walking distance, the anonymity of urban life. There were nights when the isolation of the lighthouse felt oppressive, when the constant sound of waves made me claustrophobic, when I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But there were also days when I woke to spectacular sunrises over the Atlantic, when I dove with Erica to check the pearl beds and felt like I was exploring an alien world, when we worked side by side in the workshop and I understood what true partnership felt like. There were nights when we sat by the lighthouse beacon, planning our future, dreaming of the business we were building together. The work was everything Erica had promised and more. Word spread quickly through Maine's artisan community about the jewelry restorer at Lighthouse Point, and soon I was receiving pieces from across New England, antique brooches, vintage rings, family heirlooms that needed expert care. Each piece came with a story, and I found myself becoming not just a restorer, but a curator of memories. Meanwhile, Erica and I developed the cultural preservation center she'd envisioned. We documented traditional pearl farming techniques, created educational materials for schools and museums, and began designing custom jewelry that showcased the unique beauty of Maine pearls. Our combined skills, her knowledge of pearl cultivation, my expertise in restoration and design, created something neither of us could have achieved alone. But it was the personal side of our relationship that truly flourished. Living together, working together, we discovered compatibility in ways that went far beyond physical attraction. Erica was methodical where I was impulsive, patient where I was anxious, steady where I was prone to creative flights of fancy. I brought organization to her sometimes chaotic approach to business, helped her articulate the stories behind her craft, pushed her to dream bigger than she'd ever dared. We were partners in every sense of the word. Everything changed on a cold February morning when Erica collapsed while checking the pearl beds. I was in the workshop working on a particularly challenging restoration when I heard her boat's motor sputtering. Looking out the window, I saw her struggling to start the engine, her movements uncharacteristically clumsy. By the time I reached the dock, she was slumped over the controls, barely conscious. The ambulance ride to Portland felt endless. Erica drifted in and out of consciousness, her skin pale and clammy, her breathing shallow. I held her hand and whispered reassurances I didn't believe, watching the monitors that tracked her vital signs with the desperate attention of someone who had everything to lose. At the hospital, doctors ran test after test while I paced the waiting room, calling her parents in California, trying to explain to people I'd never met that their daughter was critically ill and that yes, I was the person they should talk to about her condition. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was devastating: acute kidney failure, probably caused by a genetic condition that had been dormant until triggered by years of working in cold salt water. The damage was extensive, irreversible. Without a transplant, Erica had maybe 2 years to live. I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand while she processed the news. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the ceiling, her sea glass eyes dull with shock. 2 years, she said finally. The doctor said that's a conservative estimate. With proper treatment, dialysis, 2 years, she repeated. Not enough time to finish documenting the pearl beds. Not enough time to see the preservation center succeed. Not enough time for us. Don't talk like that, I said fiercely. You're going to fight this. We're going to fight this. She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her expression that broke my heart. Resignation. The look of someone who'd already started saying goodbye. Savannah, you need to think about your future. About going back to Brooklyn, rebuilding your life there. I can't ask you to watch me die slowly. You're not asking, I'm choosing. I leaned forward, gripping her hand tighter. I'm not going anywhere, Erica. We're in this together. But even as I said the words, I was already forming a plan. Getting tested as a potential kidney donor was surprisingly simple. A blood draw, some paperwork, a consultation with the transplant coordinator. What was complicated was keeping it secret from Erica. I told her I was going to Portland for a restoration consultation, spending increasingly longer days away from the Lighthouse while I underwent the extensive medical and psychological evaluations required for living donors. The doctors wanted to be absolutely certain I understood the risks, the recovery time, the lifetime commitment I was making. I understood perfectly. I was giving Erica the chance to live, to continue her family's work, to see our shared dreams come to fruition. There was no decision to make, only preparations to complete. The hardest part was the psychological evaluation. Sitting across from a social worker who questioned my motives, my relationship with Erica, my understanding of what I was offering. You've been together less than a year, Dr. Martinez said, reviewing my file. This is a major medical procedure with lifelong implications. Are you certain you're not acting impulsively? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I replied, Erica is my partner, my future. If our situations were reversed, she'd do the same for me without hesitation. But she doesn't know you're doing this? Not yet. I want to be sure I'm approved before I tell her. I don't want to give her false hope. Dr. Martinez made notes in my file. What if the relationship doesn't work out? What if you break up in 5 years, 10 years? Will you regret this decision? I thought about Erica's hands guiding mine as I learned to dive, her patience as she taught me to grade pearls, the way she looked at sunrise over the ocean. I thought about the life we were building together, the preservation center that would honor both our skills, the future we'd mapped out in late-night conversations. Doctor, I said finally, some things are worth the risk. Love is worth the risk. The medical tests took weeks. Blood work, kidney function studies, imaging scans, cardiac evaluations. I was poked, prodded, and examined more thoroughly than I'd ever been in my life. But every test came back perfect. Excellent kidney function, optimal health, ideal tissue compatibility with Erica. I was approved as a donor on the same day Erica started dialysis. I found her in the Lighthouse workshop after her first dialysis session, slumped in a chair with exhaustion written across every line of her body. The treatment had taken 4 hours, leaving her drained and nauseous, but it was keeping her alive. While we waited for a donor match that might never come. "How is Portland?" she asked without looking up. "Productive," I said, which was technically true. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been wrung out and hung up to dry." She attempted a smile but didn't reach her eyes. "The doctor says it'll get easier as my body adjusts, but right now I feel like I could sleep for a week." I sat down beside her, taking her hand in mine. Her skin was cooler than usual, her pulse weaker. The vibrant woman who taught me to dive for pearls was fading before my eyes, and I couldn't stand it anymore. "Erica, I need to tell you something." Something in my tone made her look at me sharply. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Something's perfect, actually." I took a deep breath, knowing that once I said the words, there would be no taking them back. "I'm going to give you one of my kidneys." The silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of waves against rocks and the hum of the filtration systems. Erica stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What?" she whispered finally. "I've been tested. We're a perfect match. The surgery is scheduled for next month, as soon as you're stable enough for the procedure." She pulled her hand away from mine, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that looked almost like anger. "You've been planning this behind my back?" "I wanted to be sure it was possible before I told you. I didn't want to get my hopes up." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the pearl beds. "Savannah, this isn't about hope. This is about you making a huge, irreversible decision about your body, your health, your life, without even consulting me." Her reaction wasn't what I'd expected. I'd imagined tears of joy, grateful embraces, relief that we'd found a solution. Instead, she looked stricken, almost betrayed. "I thought you'd be happy," I said weakly. "Happy?" She turned to face me, her sea glass eyes bright with unshed tears. "You want to cut yourself open, give away part of your body, take on medical risks that could affect you for the rest of your life, and I'm supposed to be happy about it? You're supposed to be alive because of it?" I shot back, standing to face her. "Erica, without a transplant, you have 2 years at most. With my kidney, you could have decades. How is that not worth celebrating? Because it's not your choice to make alone?" The words exploded out of her with surprising force. "This affects both of us, our relationship, our future. You should have talked to me before getting tested, before making plans, before deciding my life was worth risking yours." "Of course your life is worth risking mine," I said, frustrated by her inability to see what seemed so obvious to me. "I love you, Erica. I want to spend my life with you. This gives us that chance. And what if something goes wrong? What if there are complications? What if the kidney fails? What if you die on the operating table?" Her voice broke on the last words. "How am I supposed to live with that guilt?" "The same way I live with the guilt of watching you die when I could have saved you," I replied. "Erica, people donate kidneys to strangers all the time. I'm doing it for the woman I love. How is that not the right thing to do?" She was crying, now tears streaming down her face as she struggled with emotions I couldn't fully understand. "Because I never asked you to save me. I never asked you to sacrifice yourself for me. You don't have to ask. That's what love is, putting someone else's needs before your own." "No," she said firmly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Love is partnership. Love is making decisions together, supporting each other through hard times, facing challenges as a team. Love is not one person playing hero, while the other person has no say in their own fate." Her words hit me like a slap. In all my planning, all my preparations, I'd never considered that Erica might not want my sacrifice. I'd been so focused on the solution that I'd forgotten about the person I was supposedly saving. "So you're saying no?" I asked quietly. "I'm saying we need to talk about this properly. Discuss the risks, the alternatives, what this means for both of us." She crossed back to where I stood, taking my hands in hers. "Savannah, I appreciate what you want to do, truly. But I need to know you're doing it for the right reasons, not out of some misguided sense of heroism or obligation. I'm doing it because I can't imagine my life without you," I said honestly, "and I can't imagine mine without you either." Which is exactly why we need to be sure we're making the right choice together. We spent the next week in intensive conversations with doctors, social workers, and each other. Erica insisted on understanding every aspect of the donation process, the surgical risks, the recovery timeline, the the long-term implications for my health. She grilled the medical team with the same thorough attention she brought to pearl cultivation, leaving no question unasked. I watched her process the information with a mixture of admiration and frustration. Part of me wished she could just accept my gift with gratitude and move forward, but I was beginning to understand that her careful consideration wasn't rejection, it was love. She was protecting me the same way I was trying to protect her. The mortality risk for donors is very low, Dr. Hassan, the transplant surgeon, explained during one of our consultations, less than 1 in 3,000. The bigger concerns are potential complications, bleeding, infection, the small possibility of kidney problems later in life. And for Erica, I asked, what are her chances with the transplant? Excellent. The tissue match is nearly perfect, which reduces the risk of rejection significantly. With proper care, the donated kidney could function normally for decades. Erica squeezed my hand under the table. And without the transplant? Dr. Hassan's expression grew somber. Dialysis can maintain kidney function for a while, but it's not a long-term solution. The average life expectancy for someone with your level of kidney damage is 18 to 24 months without transplant. The numbers were stark, undeniable. But Erica had one more question. If Savannah weren't an option, what would you recommend? We'd put you on the donor waiting list immediately, but I have to be honest, young, healthy kidneys from deceased donors are rare. The average wait time for someone in your age group is 3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years. Erica didn't have that kind of time. That night, we walked along the rocky shoreline below the lighthouse, picking our way carefully over tide pools in the moonlight. The ocean was calm, its surface like dark glass reflecting the stars. I've made my decision, Erica said suddenly, stopping to face me. I want to accept your kidney. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I nearly staggered. Thank you, I whispered. But I have conditions, I nodded, willing to agree to anything. First, we do this as partners. No more secret medical appointments. No more making decisions about our health without consulting each other. We're in this together completely. Agreed. Second, if anything goes wrong, if there are complications, if the kidney fails, if either of us has health problems related to this surgery, we face those challenges together too. No guilt, no blame, no martyrdom. Agreed. And third, she said, her voice soft but firm, you need to promise me that you're not doing this to prove your love or because you feel obligated to save me. I need to know you're choosing this freely, with full understanding of what it means. I took her hands in mine, feeling the calluses from years of working with oysters, the strength that came from a life lived in harmony with the sea. Erica. I thought about this from every angle. I'd considered the risks, the recovery, the long-term implications. And every time I come to the same conclusion. I want to grow old with you. I want to see our preservation center succeed. I want to document every traditional technique we can find. I want to spend decades learning about pearls and the ocean and what it means to build a life with someone you love. I lifted her hands to my lips, kissing her knuckles gently. This isn't about proving anything or fulfilling some obligation. This is about choosing our future together. She was crying again, but this time her tears looked like relief. Then, let's do it, she said. Let's save each other. The surgery took place on a brilliant April morning, with spring finally asserting itself along the Maine coast. I remember being wheeled into the operating room, looking up at the bright lights, thinking about Erica in the adjacent room receiving the kidney that would give her life. I woke up in recovery with a pain in my side that felt like I'd been kicked by a horse, but also with a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. The hardest part was over. We'd done it. Erica's recovery was faster than mine, as expected. While I struggled with surgical pain and the disorientation of anesthesia, she was already showing signs of improved kidney function. Her color was better, her energy returning, her body responding to the gift of healthy organ function. But it was the emotional recovery that proved most challenging for both of us. I feel guilty every time I see you wince, she admitted on my 3rd day in the hospital. Every time you struggle to get comfortable, every time the pain medication makes you nauseous, I think about how you're suffering because of me. I'm healing because of you, I corrected, though even speaking took effort. This pain is temporary. What we've gained is permanent. Promise me you don't regret it. Never, I said without hesitation. Ask me again in a year, in 10 years, in 50 years. The answer will always be the same. The first month after surgery was exercising patience for both of us. I was restricted from lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds, which meant I couldn't work on jewelry restoration or help with the pearl beds. Erica was dealing with anti-rejection medications that made her nauseated and tired, along with the psychological adjustment of carrying part of my body inside hers. We spent long days in the lighthouse, reading to each other, planning modifications, to the workshop that would accommodate my temporary physical limitations, dreaming about the future that now seemed possible again. I want to expand the documentation project, Erica said one afternoon as we sat watching boats in the distance. Not just pearl farming, but all the traditional maritime crafts that are disappearing. Boat building, net making, traditional navigation techniques. That sounds incredible, I replied, already imagining the scope of such a project. I want you to lead it. Your skills in restoration, your eye for detail, your ability to tell stories through objects, you're perfect for that kind of work. The offer was generous and exciting, but something in her tone made me look at her more closely. What aren't you telling me? She was quiet for a moment, staring out at the water. The doctors want me to take a step back from the physical aspects of pearl farming. The diving, the heavy lifting, the long hours in cold water. The immunosuppressive drugs make me more vulnerable to infections, and the surgery site needs time to heal completely. That's temporary, right? Some of it. But I may never be able to dive the way I used to, which means I need to find new ways to contribute to the family business, new roles that don't put my health at risk. I heard the loss in her voice, the grief for the physical connection to her work that had defined her entire life. I'm sorry, I said inadequately. Don't be. This is the trade-off we made, and it was worth it. But it means our business model needs to evolve, and I think the documentation project could be a big part of that evolution. Over the following weeks, we began planning what would become the main Maritime Heritage Center, a combination of working pearl farm, traditional craft documentation project, and educational facility. My restoration skills would anchor the historical preservation side, while Erica's knowledge of traditional techniques would guide the educational programming. 3 months after the surgery, just as we were starting to feel like we'd gotten our lives back on track, Erica developed complications. It started with fatigue that we attributed to her medication regimen. Then came the fever, the nausea, the sudden drop in kidney function that sent us rushing back to Portland in the middle of the night. Acute rejection episode, Dr. Hassan explained after a battery of tests. It's not uncommon, especially in the first 6 months. We'll need to adjust her immunosuppressive therapy and monitor her closely. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, medication adjustments, and anxious monitoring of lab results. Erica's body was rejecting my kidney, trying to destroy the very thing that was keeping her alive. Maybe this was a mistake, she said one evening after a particularly difficult day of treatment. Maybe we should have waited for a deceased donor. Maybe the tissue match wasn't as good as we thought. Don't, I said firmly. Don't second-guess the decision now. The doctor said rejection episodes are manageable, that this doesn't mean the transplant has failed. But what if it does fail? What if your kidney stops working? What if I end up back on dialysis? Then you'll have gone through surgery for nothing. It wasn't for nothing, I insisted. Even if the worst happens, even if the transplant fails. Completely, we still had these months together. We still have the plans we've made, the business we're building. That's not nothing, Erica. That's everything. But privately, I was terrified. Not just of losing Erica, but of facing the possibility that my sacrifice hadn't been enough, that love and good intentions couldn't overcome biology and bad luck. The rejection episode lasted 2 weeks before the new medication regimen finally controlled it. Erica's kidney function stabilized, then slowly began to improve. But the experience had shaken both of us, reminding us how fragile our situation really was. I think we need to talk about the future, she said one evening as we sat by the lighthouse beacon. Not just the rosy, optimistic future we've been planning, but the realistic one. The one where my health might always be uncertain, where there might be more complications, more hospital stays, more scares like this one. I took her hand, feeling the slight tremor that was a side effect of her anti-rejection medication. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to think carefully about whether this is the life you want. A life where my health is always going to be a concern, where our plans might be interrupted by medical emergencies, where the woman you love might not be as strong or as capable as she used to be. Erica Thomas, I said, turning to face her fully, are you trying to give me an out? I'm trying to give you a choice. A real choice based on complete information about what our life together might look like. I was quiet for a moment, considering. Her words. She was right that our life would be different now, that her health would always be a factor in our decisions. But she was wrong if she thought that changed how I felt about our future. When I was restoring Mrs. Chun's necklace, I said finally, I learned that pearls aren't perfect. They have flaws, irregularities, places where the nacre didn't form evenly. But those imperfections don't make them less valuable. They make them unique, authentic, real. Savannah, I'm not finished. You think your health issues make you less desirable as a partner, but you're wrong. They make you human. They make our love real, tested, proven. Anyone can love someone when everything is easy. It takes real commitment to love someone through the hard times. I squeezed her hand, feeling the pulse of life beneath her skin, life that my kidney was helping to sustain. I didn't give you my kidney because I wanted a perfect life with you, I continued. I gave it to you because I wanted a real life with you. All of it, the good days and the bad days, the health scares and the quiet moments, the challenges and the victories. That's what partnership means. She was crying now, tears catching the lighthouse beam as it swept across the water. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. And I'm not going anywhere. Chapter 15. New Beginnings, a year after the transplant. We held the grand opening of the Maine Maritime Heritage Center. The lighthouse and its surrounding buildings had been transformed into a working museum, with Erica's pearl beds serving as a living laboratory for traditional aquaculture techniques. The main exhibition hall showcased pieces I'd restored over the past year, antique navigation instruments, traditional jewelry, tools used by generations of Maine fishermen and pearl farmers. Each piece was accompanied by documentation of the techniques used to create it, interviews with craftspeople who still practice traditional methods, and interactive displays that let visitors try their hand at various maritime crafts. But the centerpiece of the center was the pearl exhibition, featuring a necklace made from Erica's own pearls alongside historical pieces that showed the evolution of Maine's pearl farming industry. The golden undertones that had first brought Emmy to this coast glowed under carefully designed lighting, telling the story of a family's dedication to preserving beauty in an uncertain world. I never imagined it would look like this, Erica said as we stood in the exhibition hall on opening day, watching families explore the displays and children press their faces against the glass tanks where baby oysters grew. Better than we planned? I asked. Different than we planned. Better in some ways, more complicated in others. She gestured toward the accessibility features we'd incorporated throughout the space, ramps, adjustable display heights, seating, areas for visitors who needed to rest. I'm glad we designed it to be inclusive. It feels right. The health scare had changed both of us, made us more aware of the ways that physical limitations could affect someone's ability to participate in the world. The center we'd built reflected those lessons, creating space for everyone to engage with traditional crafts regardless of their physical capabilities. The opening day was a success beyond our wildest dreams. Visitors came from across New England to see the pearl beds, try their hand at jewelry making, and learn about traditional maritime crafts. Local artisans demonstrated their techniques, sharing knowledge that might otherwise have been lost when they retired. But for me, the most meaningful moment came when Mrs. Chun arrived with her granddaughter, now a married woman herself, wearing the restored pearl necklace. I wanted her to see where these pearls came from, Mrs. Chun explained, introducing her granddaughter to Erica, to understand the history she's carrying on. The young woman, Sarah, was fascinated by the pearl farming process, asking detailed questions about cultivation techniques and traditional methods. She'd inherited not just her great-grandmother's necklace, but her curiosity about the world and appreciation for craftsmanship. Would you consider teaching workshops? She asked Erica. I live in Boston, but I'd love to learn more about pearl farming, maybe even try cultivating some myself. It was exactly the kind of response we hoped for, young people connecting with traditional crafts, seeing them not as relics of the past, but as living practices worth preserving and continuing. That evening, after the last visitor had left and we'd locked up the center, Erica and I sat on the lighthouse gallery, watching the sun set over water that had become as familiar as home. No regrets? She asked, echoing a question that had become a ritual between us. None, I replied automatically, then paused to really consider the question. Actually, that's not true. I have one regret. She turned to look at me, concern flickering in her sea glass eyes. I regret that it took almost losing you for me to realize what I really wanted from life, I said. I spent so many years just going through the motions, following a path that someone else had laid out for me. If you hadn't gotten sick, if we hadn't faced the possibility of losing each other, I might never have found the courage to build something truly meaningful. So you're grateful for the kidney failure? She asked with a wry smile. I'm grateful for the wake-up call. I'm grateful for the reminder that life is short and precious and not guaranteed. I'm grateful that we were forced to think carefully about what we really wanted and then fight for it. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. What do you want now? Now that we've built the center, now that my health is stable, now that we've proven we can weather the worst storms together. I thought about it as the lighthouse beam swept across the water, that steady pulse of light that had guided ships safely to harbor for more than a century. I want to keep doing this, I said finally. Keep preserving beautiful things, keep sharing stories that matter, keep building something that will outlast both of us. But mostly, I want to keep doing it with you, even though I come with a lifetime of medical complications and immunosuppressive drugs and regular doctor visits. Especially because of that, I said, kissing the top of her head. Those complications are proof that we chose each other, that we fought for this life together. They're not obstacles to our happiness. They're evidence of it.